The 4th grade ninja war kicks off at the end of chapter 515. Over the course of the next 45 chapters, you're going to see the Allied forces' 5 main companies engage with Edo Tensei and Zetsu resistance across multiple battlefields. Following Naruto's escape from a certain solitary island, the tide of the war obviously starts to shift. With Itachi headed to deal with Kabuto, the Edo Tensei just aren't going to be a problem for much longer. On top of that, Naruto has so many clones running around that Kishimoto really can't even show us how much fighting they're doing without slowing down the pacing. On top of that, the 4th company, led by Commander-in-Chief Gaara with Onoki, seems to be in a better position than most, despite weathering a difficult battle with the 4 Edo Kage. In fact, that company looks pretty stacked and they've got a Naruto clone on hand to boot. However, their position turns from strong to downright unlucky in chapter 559 when a new, unidentified Edo Tensei gets summoned to the battlefield. So let's talk about what Madara Uchiha proceeds to do to the 4th company.
Wait, what is that? What's the matter? What are you sensing?
It's right over there!
That is Madara Uchiha.
In the first 5 pages of this engagement, we really only see basic ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu from him. Well, when I say basic, I mean it in a general sense. It takes at least 5 water jutsu ninja to cancel out the majestic destroyer flame, if not more. On top of that, none of the shinobi in the area can really touch Madara physically. 12 people get cut in a row before Gaara steps in. Genjutsu-wise, it seems like even Chio's advice on fighting the Sharingan doesn't apply to Madara. How would you swamp him with numbers and take his back if he's fast enough to turn around and paralyze you with Genjutsu before you can close on him? If Naruto and the Kage weren't here, it would be pretty safe to say that Madara would run through the entire division with just basic techniques, but they are here, so what happens next? Well, it turns out that the 3 strongest members of the 4 company happen to all be on the same page. They know Madara is the biggest threat here. Naruto and Inoki force out the Susanoo ribcage with an Odama Rasengan combo attack, and once Madara starts using the full body, Gaara pulls him out with the sand at his feet into a Rasen Shuriken. Of course, we all know what happens next. Once Madara's Rinnegan come out, it's over for every regular ninja in the area. The half-body Susanoo comes out, the signs get weaved, and the entire company gets crushed by 2 meteors. Suddenly, the war is seeming a lot less winnable. For the people who were lucky enough to survive this collision, their next few moments are going to be decided completely by chance. Madara clearly has ulterior motives and reasons to leave this battlefield that we'll discuss later, but for now, he chooses to remain at the ruins of the 4th company battlefield to test out jutsu because, quote, it'll make a prettier picture if he does it where there are people. That's crazy. The deep forest emergence that followed would have been devastating if it weren't for Naruto and Kurama's teamwork. For Madara, power is the ability to make things happen, to destroy an entire army division single-handedly. He demands the presence of the 5 Kage through his strength alone. The only thing that's been shown to force his hand in the slightest is teamwork, so of course Kishimoto's gonna send the 5 Kage into the battlefield so that they can learn how to come together as a unit. Even here though, Madara is still testing, making assessments, and frankly, he's bored. Weakness may revolt Madara, but the Senju blood running through Tsunade's veins holds his interest just enough for him to not end the fight. Once the novelty of that wears off though, the wood doppelgangers come out and things get really bad for the 5 Kage. Even when they do rally and pull off a big combo attack, Madara still has the perfect Susanoo in reserve, so by this point, the games are clearly done. Inoki is clearly the problem, consistently urging the Kage not to give up and fight, but they've just reached their limit. The teamwork that they improved over the course of the fight just can't overcome the gap, and even though Madara says he's using his full power here, I think there's something he was keeping in reserve. Kabuto's Obi told that ninja revived with Edo Tensei recover all the abilities that they possessed during life. That includes unusual abilities like the Sharingan and 6 Paths Rinnegan. When he speaks to Madara later on, he mentions that he made Madara, quote, greater than he was when he was alive, but what does that even mean? Even Madara wants to know. Well, Kabuto knows that Madara stole a piece of Hashirama's power at the Final Valley, so he decided to run an experiment by implanting even more of Hashirama into Madara's Edo body. Thus the phrase, greater than he was when he was alive. It's important to note though, Madara awakened the Rinnegan as he was starting to die of old age, and Black Zetsu says that Kabuto got the DNA he used to revive him directly from Madara's old man corpse. In other words, even though Kabuto gave Madara more Hashirama cells, he would have had the Rinnegan as an Edo regardless. Against the 5 Kage, we see Madara use the Preta path to absorb jutsu, and it looks like he uses a human path to hold his soul inside of its body after Kabuto gets defeated. The soul exits his body, then he actively pulls it back inside of himself before weaving the science to release the Edo summoning contract for his actual body. So what am I saying here? Well, these are all signs that Edo Madara has access to all of his Rinnegan abilities, including Limbo, which takes his sandbagging against the 5 Kage to another level. That's not to say that choosing not to use a specific hack's ability is the same thing as not using your full power in the form of the perfect Susanoo in the case here, but it is interesting to think about. Let's move on. 50 chapters later, the war has developed into a situation that gives Madara a soft reset of sorts. We'll talk more about how things always end up going his way later, but for now, all you really need to know is that Madara is pretty much right back where he started, by himself, facing yet another stacked group. So let's talk about what Madara proceeds to do to all of the Biju at once.
And up next, I'll be taking possession of every one of you. Filthy beasts.
For one, keep in mind, he's blind here with Hashirama's Senjutsu chakra absorbed. Despite his new physical vulnerability, as he's alive now, he runs straight in and ends up getting hit by Shikaku's Sand Jutsu. The Biju then hit him one time each, then start to seal him before Madara starts using the full body Susanoo. Are you seeing a pattern here? Once again, we're seeing him use the least amount of effort possible to get past an obstacle. Note that after all of this, he's also only mildly beaten up, which is pretty crazy. At this point, Kurama and Gyuki have made it over, and the tail stack that happens after breaks through Madara's Susanoo and tears off one arm. Luckily though, White Zetsu arrives in time to get him his real Rinnegan, and after that, the Biju end up getting one-tapped and collared by Limbo and the Ghetto statue. Just like last time, once that Rinnegan comes out, it's simply over for everybody involved. Naruto and Sasuke included, they get pieced up after this as well. Also, note that Madara says he was fighting with less refinement because he has Hashirama's healing now, so if he's fighting sloppily while alive because he knows he can recover, how do you think he was fighting when he was in an immortal Edo body? The more Madara speaks, the worse everybody who's fought him so far ends up looking. Clearly, this is a powerful character, but that's actually not all Madara has going for him. To be pragmatic, in reality, Kishimoto can make any character strong. Hagoromo has power, Hashirama has power, Naruto and Sasuke actively gain power as the series continues. What makes Madara different from all these other characters is the power of his name.
He defeated the Anbu Black Ops assigned to Lord Third, got past the highest level classified barrier. He slipped in and out of the village's barriers without triggering any alarms. Are you Madara Uchiha?
His infamy is what makes him the main villain of the entire series, as his hand can be seen in most everything bad that happens in the story. Everybody knows who Madara was and chooses to mention his name only at the most important of moments. For example, when Kakashi gets to the final valley too late to stop his students, he can't help but comment on the irony of the location. Of course, Madara and Hashirama fought here as well after they built the Leaf Village. According to Kakashi, their battle in Naruto and Sasuke's by extension is like the nearby river in that it will never cease. For Jiraiya, Madara is less of a historical figure and more of an immediate threat or a suspect. He speculates that Madara could have been behind the recent Nine Tails attack, and he's pretty much right on the money. Speaking of the Nine Tails, Kurama himself has an outright antagonistic relationship with Madara. When Sasuke enters Naruto's mindscape during the hideout reunion, Kurama notes that the vile chakra and ocular abilities on display remind him of Madara. In fact, the other remaining Uchiha all have some connection or knowledge of Madara, which makes sense. Each time his story is told though, the details change slightly. Itachi, for example, hails him as the first of the clan to awaken the Mangekyo Sharingan. According to him, Madara eventually went blind and stole his younger brother's eyes, founded the Leaf of Hashirama, and then fought him for leadership of the village later on. Obito says that Madara fought the Senju countless times with his MS and gained a name by fighting Hashirama, who was the most feared by the mercenary clans of the Warring States period. The way he tells it, Madara's brother volunteered his eyes willingly, and after the village was formed, Madara was the sole dissenter among the clan, advocating for an Uchiha Hokage. He allegedly hated Hashirama and left the village due to a lack of support, then came back and declared war. Later on, even Hashirama thought he died at the Final Valley. So how accurate were Itachi and Obito's stories about Madara? These two people are fundamentally dishonest all the time, so I think it's pretty fair to be skeptical of the information that's presented. For example, we know that Obito straight up lies about the Nine Tails attack being a random accident. Other than that though, most of the other information they present is true. When Inoki was a child, he met Madara while he was still a Leaf Ninja during a diplomatic meeting. Well, I say diplomatic because Inoki implies that there was an alliance promise between the Leaf and the Stone, but Madara demands they bow to the might of the Leaf and beats them up while holding back, which is on brand. The most important detail here though is his reaction to hearing Hashirama's name. When Inoki says it, Madara orders him to never mention that shinobi's name in his presence, which seems pretty antagonistic to me. Maybe Madara really did hate Hashirama. Hashirama himself says that after he and Madara stopped being friends, Madara decided to erase him from his life. These were the famous Warring States clan battles that Obito described to Sasuke, and it sounds to me like Madara tried to kill Hashirama for some years. I truly don't know why Kishimoto had Madara sweating like this in this panel, but Hashirama does say that Madara can't win against them after Tobirama kills Izuna. Whether you think that statement was in reference to MS Madara versus Hashirama and the entire Senju clan, or a 1v1 between the two, take that as you will. What we do know here is that Hashirama gives Madara a chance to surrender here, but Izuna, the smoke demon, begs his brother not to listen. Later on, Izuna dies and leaves him with the power to protect the Uchiha and the EMS. If Izuna was already on his deathbed, Madara stealing his eyes doesn't really seem that likely to me. Obito was probably telling the truth when he says the eyes were a voluntary gift, and Itachi either didn't know what he was talking about here or twisted the story to manipulate Sasuke. Interestingly enough, that may mean that Madara might have been going blind during that last battle with the Senju, but that's not really the most important. After Madara loses that second fight, Hashirama says that this was the first time Madara's back touched the ground in battle. Once again, we don't really know if Madara had help during this fight from his own clan. Hashirama says that the Uchiha were already in an unfavorable position and at this point had started to defect, and we only see Madara by himself on the battlefield surrounded by Hashirama and the Senju after he loses. That's all to say, Madara admits that Hashirama is stronger than him back when they were children, and he unsuccessfully tries to kill Hashirama on the battlefield for years after that. Obito also doesn't have a reason to lie about Hashirama's reputation as the most feared ninja of the Warring States period. That being said, there's just a lot we don't know about these two at the moment. We see them using their respective wood and fire styles on panel, but we just don't know if Hashirama has Sage mode yet. Even here in the most recent fight, Madara only uses the half-body Susanoo on panel, and he just got his EMS, so it's pretty likely that he doesn't have the perfect Susanoo or maybe even the full body yet. That aside, it's implied that Madara listens in to Tobirama and Hashirama's conversation about him not being likely to win a Hokage election. After this, he reads the writing on the wall and urges his clan to abandon the village. This outright contradicts what Itachi says about Madara fighting Hashirama for leadership of the Leaf later on. He had already decided to leave and just wanted his clan to come with him. The last piece of context here that we get that's relevant to Obito and Itachi's stories is Hashirama's thoughts on Madara's motivations for coming back to attack the Leaf. He theorizes that Madara wanted to destroy his previous dream, but that's just a theory. It turns out nobody really knows why he came back. When Obito says that he attacked to declare war and Itachi says he fought for leadership over the village, it's important that we understand that all these thoughts are theories. Obito's probably the most likely person to know because of the Eye of the Moon plan, but in reality, nobody else really knows what's driving Madara at this point, which we'll talk about later. With all that in mind, both Itachi and Obito were pretty accurate information-wise, and they really only tweak certain details due to their agendas or general lack of knowledge. Of course, what makes Madara more than an infamous historical figure is his long-term plan. Nobody knows why he really came back to attack the Leaf, because in reality, Madara started looking towards dreams of the far future as soon as the village started closing in on him and his clan. He failed to protect his brother. He failed to create a safe home for the Uchiha. In the face of these shortcomings, Madara abandons his past efforts and leaves his old self behind. This experience of failure was pivotal for Madara, and we even see him talk to Sasuke about this later on. Having the EMS proves that you've continued to seek something despite many great losses. However, in the face of a great enough failure, even that search will end. For Sasuke, he'll most likely die here, and for Madara, he'll most likely watch his clan wither from afar. They're both powerless. Madara calls this a true ending, and it's interesting that both Uchiha go on to awaken the Rinnegan after their individual low points here. Sasuke and Madara have a lot in common, which we'll touch on more later. Similarities aside though, with this long-term plan in hand, no one will be able to catch Madara from behind, and as we see in the war arc, he really wasn't wrong here. Nobody could fully stop him. Now, that's not to say that the Eye of the Moon plan was easy. In fact, almost everything that can go wrong for Madara goes wrong. It's only through a combination of shrewd planning and fate itself that things come to fruition for him. So let's start at step 1, awaken the Rinnegan. To do this, Madara's gonna need Hashirama's power, so he'll need to return to the village and take it. Along the way, he also takes control of Kurama. The Ten Tails is clearly at the forefront of Madara's mind here, as he won't even address Kurama as an individual being, calling him a piece of himself in reference to the Jubi. After this, Madara confronts Hashirama. This fight takes on new meaning in the context of the larger plan, but it's also less complicated than it may seem. Madara looks forward to the battles he'll fight with Hashirama as he pursues his true dream. We'll talk more about Madara's new hedonistic outlook later on, but for now, it's just important to understand that while Madara has fun fighting Hashirama and has a motivation to beat him, a straight up victory just isn't necessary for him in the long term. This is epitomized by the time delay Izanagi that Madara implants in his eye, whether you think he did that before the battle or during. The point here is that Madara is looking towards the future and is prepared for the possibility of a loss. He says that Hashirama is the only one who's an even match for him, but later on during the fight, he also says it's been a while since they fought all out. It might be fair to say that by the time Madara talks to Hashirama about his true dream, he has the perfect Susanoo, as when Inoki asks Madara if he was holding back during their fight, Madara confirms, and of course Madara was wearing a leaf headband at the time. Seeing the results of the battle though, it's safe to say that Hashirama was stronger here, as he took care of Madara and sealed Kurama during the fight, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Madara got what he wanted regardless. He may have failed to protect his clan with the power his brother gave him willingly, but this new power that he's stolen from his closest friend has a different level of potential. Despite stealing Hashirama's power though, things almost fizzle out for Madara before he can even consider step 2. He doesn't awaken the Rinnegan until he's on the verge of dying of old age. Of course, once he does get his Rinnegan, he immediately summons the Geto statue and keeps himself alive with his chakra, but being old really puts a damper on capturing all the Biju. For that, Madara's gonna need a proxy, someone who can work towards his goals, and instead, someone like him with a fundamentally kind heart who he can then pitch into darkness. I won't spend too much time talking about Obito Uchiha here, as he's complex enough to deserve his own video, but know that he's very necessary. After saving his life and orchestrating Ren's death, Madara effectively recreates himself in Obito. He implants his eyes into Nagato with the intention of using him as a Rinne rebirth sacrifice, teaches Obito some important jutsu, and dies. However, things don't go as planned from this point either. When Madara is revived, he's genuinely surprised that it's through Edo Tensei as opposed to Rinne Rebirth, but if we know anything about this character, we know he's completely comfortable with pivoting after things don't go as planned. Reviving Madara in any form is a bad idea for the world, and there are clear signs that Madara was completely free to do as he pleased the second he came back, Edo Tensei or not. When he uses Chibako Tensei on the Fourth Company, he demonstrates a better understanding of the original purpose of Edo Tensei than even Kabuto, reminding him that the jutsu was originally meant to take other ninja out along with you. It seems that Madara either learned this during the Warring States period fighting Tobirama or during the early phases of the village, and Tobirama himself uses the jutsu this way later in the war arc. When Madara talks to Black Zetsu after being revived, he doesn't mention the possibility of being restrained by Kabuto at all as he considers his next move, and after Kabuto goes down, he straight up calls him careless for using Edo Tensei to revive someone who knows which science to weave to rescind the summoning contract. Even Obito can't help but comment on it being, quote, just like Madara to resist the Edo Tensei, which is the real reason he was nervous when Kabuto showed up with Madara's body earlier on. Despite being back in the world though, it's still not smooth sailing for Madara. Because he doesn't have a living body, he can't become the Ten Tails Jinchuriki. He'll need Obito to use Rinne Rebirth on him for that, but Obito isn't the most reliable subordinate. Not only did he bring Ten Tails back without capturing Kurama and Gyuki, but he also doesn't seem that willing to die for Madara. Madara himself comments on not being able to rely on any of his subordinates. So with that in mind, Madara willingly takes a back seat as the Jubi transforms and lets Obito take the lead for now. Checking out the power of the Ten Tails is fun enough to keep him entertained, and it's implied that he takes it easy on Naruto and B because of that. Of course, knowing Madara, he's got one last trump card left to play, but he's fine with waiting at the moment. Things get even more entertaining for him when Hashirama is revived and heads towards the battlefield, but the plan still comes first. Obito will revive him one way or another. It's at this point though that another wrench gets thrown into things. Obito, aware of the heart tag Madara placed on him, gets rid of it and becomes Ten Tails Jinchuriki himself. This puts Madara in an interesting position. If you remember his actions at the Final Valley, you'll know that this is someone who's prepared to lose in the short term to reach his goal. Hashirama beat him there, but Madara stole his power in the process. Here, Obito has pretty much outsmarted Madara. He got rid of that heart tag, and now he's too strong to control. However, isn't this still a good situation for the Eye of the Moon plan overall? If Obito manages to hold off the Allied Shinobi Force for 15 minutes after the tree goes up, he'll win and the Infinite Tsukiyomi will be casted. Sounds like a win to me. Despite this, Madara claims that he will be the one to do this, and he goes after Hashirama to steal more of his power so that he can fight Obito, weaken him, and take his place. There are two main reasons I can think of for why Madara would be doing this. One, he noticed how Obito was trying to confirm his life decisions through Naruto and knew that he'd fall short in the end. I personally don't like this reason as much because Madara says later on that Naruto saved him the trouble of weakening Obito and taking the Biju out of him. If he knew Obito was going to lose from the beginning, he wouldn't have tried to take Hashirama's power. Maybe you could say he noticed Obito faltering mid-fight and stopped seriously trying to beat Hashirama as a result, but that takes too many assumptions for me. The second reason, which I like a little bit more, is that Madara is just a narcissist. There's a lot of evidence for this being the case in the story, and we'll go over all of that later, but Madara having to be the person to lead the world to salvation seems pretty consistent with his personality to me. Whether he would be able to beat Jubito or not, at the end of the day, Madara's planning once again creates a win-win situation. Either Obito casts the Infinite Tsukiyomi for him, or Obito loses and then Madara can force him to use Rinne Rebirth regardless. Of course, we know what ends up happening, and once Madara fully comes back to life, things get bad for the world. Once Madara traps the Biju in the Ghetto statue, a few things happen that really demonstrate the difference between him and Obito. For one, the 6 Paths 10-tail coffin seal that takes Obito half a chapter to use takes Madara a single page. Keep in mind, this is a more complete Jubi with Gyuki and half of Kurama in it that Madara is dealing with. He also immediately masters the form, manifesting the Truth Seeker orbs and 6 Paths Senjutsu the second he becomes the Jubi Jinchuriki. Now that Madara has the 8 and 9 tails, he also doesn't need Hagoromo's tools inside of him, so he just spits them out. All he needs to do now is move on to step 4, casting the Infinite Tsukiyomi. Things here start off in a familiar way. Madara, per usual, is playing games with the cast as he waits for things to fall into place. Black Zetsu may have not been able to deliver the second half of Kurama and Madara's second eye, but Might Guy's 8 gates seem entertaining. It's important to note how essential Gaara, Minato, Rock Lee, and Kakashi's teamwork is here to letting Guy's taijutsu fully shine. Without them, the Sekizo wouldn't have been able to hit Madara directly, which continues to hammer in this point of Madara only being able to be taken down by teamwork. After Minato takes the majority of Madara's truth-seeking orbs out of the equation, Guy runs up to Madara and hits him with the Night Guy, which almost kills him. I would like to note though that Madara once again never uses Limbo in this fight. Like I said earlier, I don't think Limbo is analogous to Madara going all out in a fight, but it is interesting to notice that once Naruto arrives, Limbo comes out the second Madara is on the back foot. Madara wonders to himself if Naruto is pressing him so hard because he's not fully healed yet, but then he confirms that's not the case. Naruto has simply gotten much stronger. Now we're back in another familiar situation for Madara. Things aren't going according to plan. Once again though, fate seems to be on his side as somebody speaks to him, advising him to absorb the God Tree itself. Madara does so, fully heals, and then proceeds to still get beaten up by Naruto and Sasuke. Check out how he claims that this is going to be the final battle as both sides have 6 Paths Senjutsu and a Rinnegan, then immediately switches tracks and goes for his second eye because of how extraordinary Naruto and Sasuke are. Even if both sides are evenly matched with identical powers, teamwork will always outweigh someone working alone. Kishimoto makes this as clear as he can as Madara's Limbo finally gets explained to be a clone of Madara himself. It doesn't matter how many other Madaras Madara can make, whether it's Obito, Black Zetsu, or even these Limbo clones, a good team can still pose an issue to him. After this, Madara steals Kakashi's eye and warps himself into the Kamui dimension. It's interesting to think about how Madara taking Obito's eye was foreshadowed 70 chapters ago, but some people actually have a problem with Madara using Kamui here. For one, yes, Kakashi's eye can be used to warp oneself in or out of the Kamui dimension. Kakashi does it in chapter 655. Second, Madara being able to use this ability with no practice is fine. He says that he understands the ability decently well during the fight with Kakashi and Obito himself says that even Zetsu will take over his body and use Kamui if he lets his guard down. In fact, we see Zetsu do this in the next chapter, so Madara being able to use it as well really isn't that much of an issue to me. Things progress pretty quickly from this point on. Madara, intently focused on achieving his plan, immediately flies into the air, spams Chibaku Tensei raindrops and Limbo clones, and casts the Infinite Tsukiyomi. If you ask me, this is the moment when Madara wins, so let's talk about what happens next. So let's get this straight first. There are individual warnings about the risks of too much power across the entire war arc. Itachi tells Naruto as much when he tries to put the entire war on his back. We've seen teamwork, the direct opposite of individual power consolidation, generate good results against every villain in this storyline. Sasuke and Itachi take down Kabuto. The Shinobi Alliance takes down Obito. So when Hagoromo says that Madara has become just like Kaguya, this character that we've started to hear more and more about lately, it's not very surprising. Philosophically, it's true. Both of these characters are self-centered and have too much individual power, which is a bad combination. What should be called into question about chapter 679 though is whether Madara literally becoming Kaguya works when he was already stated to be just like her. That depends on some other things. At this point of the war, Madara has demonstrated that he's better than just about everybody present as a ninja. If he's not stronger than you, which is very unlikely, his plan is formulated in a way that allows him to win by losing. If things don't go according to plan, the heavens are already smiling on him, so he ends up getting what he needs anyways. This creates a situation where Madara is pretty unchecked. He can say things like, I have the strongest chakra and I'm gonna lead the world because nobody can really check him. He can operate alone because his plan is foolproof and he's got amazing luck on top of that. So what needs to happen to Madara from a story perspective though? Well, we know he needs to lose, right? Even if Naruto and Sasuke don't know how to undo the infinite Tsukiyomi initially, Hagoromo tells them later. They've got the sealing jutsu necessary to seal him, and they were literally about to do it earlier, so there's no reason why they wouldn't be able to do it. As strong as Madara is, after he wins, one of his biggest strengths is suddenly no longer relevant. There's no larger plan now for him to rely on. In other words, Naruto and Sasuke taking him down with teamwork works just fine for the story. Of course though, that's not what happens. But why is that? Well, for us to understand that question, we have to understand who Madara is. For Uchiha, their hearts are reflected by their eyes, and Madara was always an anomaly among his clan. He was stronger than most adults around him as a child, but he was also incredibly sensitive, especially about his back. Hashirama may have wanted to build a village for everybody, but Madara really just wanted a place where he could watch over his little brother. And as he grew older, that goal grew to include his entire clan, especially after Izuna's death. His brother's will was clearly very important to him as he pushed forward and continued fighting despite Hashirama giving him a way out at every point. Despite that though, Madara still wasn't strong enough to fulfill Izuna's wishes. His eyes had evolved as far as they could, and even his Susanoo had two faces, allowing him to fight completely alone without anyone ever taking his back, but he still lost to the Senju. All that sacrifice, all that power, just to fail. At this low point, Hashirama's kindness gave him the opportunity to pivot and compromise, and it changed the world. Madara tolerated living with his brother's killer and built the village alongside his closest friend. It was a dream. If he couldn't protect his brother, surely Madara could at least keep his clan safe as their leader. Of course, this didn't work out and Madara is forced to pivot again. When he leaves the village, he throws away everything he had been working for and his values fundamentally shift. The will his brother passed down to him just wasn't real. Madara talks to the 5 Kage about this later on, telling them that the only thing that remains of his brother is the ocular power that clings to Madara's eyes. The only thing that's truly passed down according to him is hate. But despite all of this, Madara is still a fundamentally kind man. Hashirama says it himself. So instead of watching his clan die slowly, he pursues a new dream, one that he thinks will save everyone. It's at this point that Madara really starts to go insane. Fighting for his clan in the Warring States period was excusable, and throwing a tantrum and beating up Inoki and Mu might have been questionable, but attacking the village that his clan lives in is just out of character. Clearly, this is a different person with a different set of morals. Aside from a religious adherence to the words written on the stone tablet and an unshakable belief in his own power, Madara also decides to pass the time between now and the achievement of his true dream having fun. To him, if his brother is dead and his clan has rejected him, it makes much more sense just to see this world as entertainment. That's why he plays with the 5 Kage, that's why he plays with the Ten Tails, that's why he plays with Hashirama, and that's why he plays with my guy. In fact, that's probably why Obito spends so much time messing around in the earlier parts of the story, instigating a fight between Naruto and Sasuke. To be Madara is to be a hedonist, at least in part. But that's not to say that the Eye of the Moon plan was all fun and games. Madara waited, clinging to life to find a young Uchiha to manipulate and sacrifice. You have to imagine that if Sasuke reminded him of Izuna and made him consider using him as a pawn, he had to have seen his little brother in Obito at least a little bit. That's a difficult choice to make, but when Madara echoes Hashirama's words to Sasuke as he kills him, or at least tries to, it's clear that he's willing to endure anything for the sake of his dream. I also think it's pretty impressive how much Naruto and Madara can bounce off each other while barely speaking to each other. Everybody talks about how similar Naruto and Hashirama are in the story, but to the man who might have known Hashirama best, Naruto is just someone who's interfering with everybody else's happiness. They're complete opposites. All that character stuff aside though, Madara's self-reliance becoming a hindrance is definitely better demonstrated through Black Zetsu's betrayal as opposed to a straight up loss to Naruto and Sasuke. Him winning and getting the infinite Tsukuyomi off creates a perfect contradiction where he can be so right in achieving everything by himself that he brings about his own death. The eyes that he was so proud of that allowed him to read the stone tablet and look further into the future than anybody else ended up leading him right into a dead end. As his body collapses under the weight of a power that even he can't control, the last thing to break apart are those eyes, the Rinnegan he pursued for so long. Another underrated benefit of him turning into Kaguya is that he remains unsealed so that Hashirama, the main focal point of his life, can speak to him on his deathbed. I think that scene is really underrated. Overall though, Madara is a completely amazing villain. I think he's undoubtedly the main antagonist of Naruto. Kaguya is more of a consequence than a character, and Sasuke isn't a villain so he doesn't count. Having problems with Kaguya appearing in the story in the way that she did is fine, but I personally think it does more good than bad for Madara himself. That aside, if you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. Definitely subscribe if you're new here and give the video a like. Also, I'm planning on more deep dive videos on characters like Sasuke in the future, so give me a shout in the comments if you want to hear that sooner rather than later.